The loneliness was a heavy coat Mason Price had worn for 10 years, and tonight, it felt heavier than a shroud. It was the annual Luna Ball, a night meant to celebrate the sacred bond of mates, a night when the entire Crescent Creek pack, from the oldest elders to the newest born pups, gathered to honor love. Yet to Mason, their alpha, the night was a brutal reminder of all he lacked. He stood at the head of a banquet hall that shimmered with fairy lights and the laughter of 100 happy couples. The air was thick with the scent of pine and cinnamon, the low hum of conversation and the soft, rhythmic strum of a guitar. He should have been at the heart of it, a king in his kingdom. Instead, he felt like a ghost haunting his own home. He was a king without a queen, an alpha without a Luna. It was a failure that gnawed at him, a silent, corrosive shame that no amount of power or authority could ever mask. Mason's gaze swept over the hall, landing on his beta Marcus and his mate Hannah. They were a picture of perfect harmony, their bodies swaying in a slow dance, their foreheads pressed together. The look in Marcus's eyes, a fierce, all-consuming devotion, was a mirror of Mason's own unfulfilled longing. It was a longing that had gone unanswered for far too long, a primal ache that no amount of pack responsibility could ever soothe. For the past decade he had searched relentlessly. He had traveled to other territories under the guise of diplomatic visits, met powerful she-wolves from different packs, and even allowed his elders to present him with potential matches. But his wolf remained stubbornly, painfully silent. It was a terrifying thought, that he, the powerful alpha of one of the largest packs in the United States, might never find his other half. The weight of his pack's future rested on his shoulders, a future that required a Luna to be whole. A strong pack needed a strong Luna. He couldn't deny it, and he couldn't ignore the worried glances his elders cast his way. A gentle hand on his arm brought him back from the spiraling abyss of his thoughts. It was his mother, Clara, her face lined not with age, but with the quiet worry that had become a constant companion since he'd taken the alpha title. "Mason, are you all right?" she asked, her voice a soft balm against the emotional turmoil within him. He forced a smile, a practiced mask he had perfected over the years. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired of waiting." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of understanding and shared pain. "My son, you deserve to find her. We all know you do. The ancestors will guide you." Her words were meant to be a comfort, and they were, but they were also a brutal reminder of his failure. As the music swelled to a crescendo, a new wave of despair washed over him. The hall was a sea of happiness he could not join, a vibrant painting he was merely a dark, desolate corner of. He felt his wolf stir within him, a low, guttural growl of frustration and pain that vibrated deep in his chest. It was a silent, agonizing cry that only he could hear. It wasn't just the lack of a mate that pained him, it was the thought that he might be broken. His greatest fear was not a challenge from a rival pack or a surprise attack from a hunter. His greatest fear was to die alone, a solitary alpha, his lineage ending with him, his pack's bloodline weakened forever. He clenched his fists, the polished marble of his throne digging into his palms. He couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't keep going through the motions, attending balls and pretending he was content. He couldn't pretend that the constant humming ache in his soul was something he could ignore. He was a leader who needed a partner, a warrior who needed a home, a man who needed his mate. A new thought, a different way, a flicker of hope, ignited in the darkness. He had heard whispers from his contacts in other packs, stories of a new kind of service. A matchmaking service for werewolves. It was unconventional, highly secretive, and rumor had it run by a human woman who had a perfect record. Most werewolves would scoff at such a notion. A human trying to meddle in the sacred bond of fated mates? It was preposterous. But to Mason it wasn't preposterous. It was a prayer. A last resort. He reached for the glass of water on the table, his hand trembling slightly. He took a long, slow drink, his gaze fixed on the happy couples on the dance floor. The music, once a source of pain, now felt like a desperate plea. He was done with waiting for destiny to find him. He would go out and find it himself. He would give this human his trust. He was willing to pay any price to find her. He had to. For his pack. For his family. For himself. He would do whatever it took to fill this void in his heart, to finally feel the wholeness he had only ever dreamed of. The moment he made the decision, a profound sense of purpose, a strange, exhilarating calm settled over him. His destiny was no longer in the hands of fate. It was in his own. Chapter 1. Chloe Rivers was a modern-day Cupid with a profound sense of detachment. Her company, Faded Finds, was not for star-crossed human lovers, but for werewolves burdened by the agonizing search for their one and only true mate. It was a business built on a foundation of cynicism and data, a secret enterprise she ran from a sleek, minimalist office in downtown Seattle. She had found her niche in a world that ran on primal instinct, and her success was a testament to her unique, almost surgical approach. Her success rate stood at a flawless 100%. To her, love wasn't a mystical, cosmic connection. It was a biological one, a complex cocktail of pheromones, psychological compatibility, and shared life goals. He simply had a knack for reading the ingredients. Her office was a reflection of her methodology. Organized, sterile, and entirely devoid of anything that might be considered romantic. The walls were a cool, unassuming gray. Her desk, a polished slab of glass, held only a large monitor, a high-tech keyboard, and a single perfectly manicured bonsai tree. It was a place of efficiency, not emotion. "So what's the verdict?" Chloe asked, her voice calm and even. She slid a thin, unmarked folder across the desk to her client, a young beta with a goofy, anxious grin named Mark. Mark, a handsome man with kind eyes and a mop of unruly brown hair, nervously picked up the file. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. He was a good guy, the kind of wolf who would bring flowers to his date and remember the anniversary of their first kiss. Which was why Chloe had matched him with someone who was his complete and utter opposite. "She's an accountant, Chloe," he said, his voice laced with confusion. "I was hoping for something more adventurous. You know, a rock climber or a deep-sea diver." Chloe leaned back in her chair, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She had heard this countless times. Clients came to her with a checklist of traits, a fantasy list of what their mate should be. Chloe's job was to remind them that the heart, or more accurately, the wolf, knew better. "Mark," she began, her tone a perfect blend of professional authority and quiet amusement, "you're a homebody. You like board games on a rainy Saturday and quiet evenings with a book. A rock climber would exhaust you. An accountant, however, is a fascinating species. They thrive on order, but their wild side is often just beneath the surface. Trust me, Mark. He's adventurous. Just not in the way you expect." She let the sentence hang, giving him a meaningful look. Mark's eyebrows shot up. He had seen the stories of her success. He knew not to question her methods. He just hadn't expected them to be so unconventional. He thought of the list of qualities he had given her. A list that included outgoing and spontaneous. Chloe had ignored every single one of them. "She's also a Luna in training for her PAC's finance committee," Chloe added. "You're a beta. The two of you have the shared goals and the right kind of mental connection to make a pack work. The physical stuff, well, that's just a matter of chemistry, isn't it?" Mark blushed, a deep crimson spreading across his neck. He stammered, "Right. Yes. Thank you, Chloe." "You'll thank me more after your first date," she said with a dry wink. He stood up, clutching the file as if it were a sacred text. "You have a perfect record," he said, his voice full of hope. "I do my best to maintain it," she replied, a flash of something unreadable passing through her eyes. After Mark left, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. She ran a hand through her short, sleek dark hair and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. She had been at this for 6 years. 6 years of listening to wolves talk about destiny, about a soul-deep connection they couldn't define. She had learned to speak their language, to read the tells in their posture, the subtle sense they couldn't hide, and the way their eyes flickered when they spoke about their loneliness. And she had done it all without believing a single word of it. To her, the fated mate bond was just a biological imperative, a highly evolved instinct designed to ensure the strongest offspring. The true love part was just a beautiful lie people told themselves to make the whole thing sound more magical. And as long as she could make it work for her clients, she could continue to make a very comfortable living. She had even convinced a few of her clients that the mate bond wasn't a binary switch, but a spectrum that could be nudged in the right direction. It was a lie, but it was a lie that worked. Her phone buzzed on the corner of her desk, pulling her from her thoughts. An email notification flashed on the screen. The subject line, bold and underlined, read, Alpha Mason Price, Fated Mate Search. Chloe's hands, which were always steady, trembled slightly. Mason Price. The name was whispered in hushed tones across the supernatural community. He was a legend, an alpha so powerful his pack was simply known as the Price Pack. His reputation was built on his strength, his loyalty, and the devastating tragedy of his lonely search. He was every werewolf's dream client, and a nightmare to get wrong. A failure with a lesser-known wolf was a setback. A failure with an alpha of Mason's caliber would be career suicide. She slowly clicked on the email. It was short and to the point. His beta had been in touch with her publicist for weeks, but she had never heard directly from the alpha himself. He wanted an in-person meeting. He was ready to start the process immediately. The email wasn't demanding or arrogant. It was surprisingly polite and concise. It was the email of a man who was desperate, but was trying very hard not to show it. A small shiver, not of fear but of pure adrenaline, ran down her spine. This was the biggest challenge of her career. A male alpha, in a position of power and authority, was coming to a human for help with the most sacred part of his life. It was unprecedented. And if she could solve it, if she could find him his fated mate, she wouldn't just be a matchmaker with a good record. She'd be a legend. A wave of anticipation, cold and thrilling, washed over her. She leaned forward, her elbows on the desk, her chin resting on her intertwined fingers. She stared at the email, her mind already racing. Mason Price was more than a client. He was a puzzle she was determined to solve. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, not since she had started this business. Genuine excitement. Not for love, of course, but for the exhilarating high of the challenge. This wasn't about love. It was about proving she was the best in her field. She was the one who could find the alpha, his match. She was the one who could find the missing half of his soul. And as she thought it, a cold, empty feeling settled in her own chest. She could find his, but she knew she would never find her own. Her perfection was based on her detachment. And to be a true expert, she had to stay exactly where she was, on the outside looking in. Chapter 2. The following Tuesday, Mason Price strode into the lobby of Chloe Rivers's office building with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to having the world bend to his will. His senses, however, were on high alert. The sterile scent of the building's air conditioning, the faint aroma of burnt coffee from a nearby cafe. None of it was the pine and rich earth of his pack's territory. He was in a human world, a concrete jungle where his instincts felt both heightened and dulled at the same time. He was a predator in a world of prey, and the feeling was oddly disconcerting. He took the elevator to the 15th floor, his mind replaying the email he had sent. He was still half convinced this was a ridiculous idea. A human, a professional matchmaker for wolves? It was unheard of. But the desperation that had gnawed at him for a decade was a powerful motivator, strong enough to silence the skeptical voice in his head. He had to try. He had nothing left to lose. When the elevator doors opened, he was greeted by a cool, silent hallway that led to a single glass door with the words "Fated Finds" etched in elegant black script. He pushed the door open and stepped into an office that felt more like an art gallery than a business. The walls were a stark, neutral gray. A single vibrant abstract painting hung opposite a sleek minimalist reception desk, behind which sat a young woman with a kind smile and a laptop. The air smelled of clean linen and something else he couldn't quite place. It was calming. "You must be Mason," the receptionist said, her smile broadening. "Chloe is just finishing up. She'll be with you in a moment." Mason nodded, his eyes sweeping the room. The space was meticulously clean, organized, and oddly comforting. He was used to the controlled chaos of his pack's den, the familiar smells of sweat and wildness, and the constant hum of life. This place was the opposite. It was a place of quiet, a sanctuary built for logical thought. It was the antithesis of everything his wolf craved. And yet he found himself relaxing. Just then, a door at the far end of the office opened and a woman stepped out. Chloe. He had seen her picture on the website, a professional headshot of a woman with intelligent, dark eyes and a no-nonsense expression. The photo, however, did no justice to the real thing. She was smaller than he had expected, but held herself with a quiet, unshakable confidence that radiated outward. She was wearing a perfectly tailored black blazer over a simple white top and dark trousers, an outfit that screamed professional and nothing else. Her dark hair was cut into a sharp, practical bob that framed her face, and her eyes, when they met his, were a deep, piercing brown that seemed to hold all the secrets of the world. A strange jolt, a physical zap of energy shot through him. It was a sensation he had never felt before. It wasn't the fiery jolt of a fated mate bond. He knew what that felt like from watching his parents, his pack members. It was different. A deep, soulful resonance, as if a missing piece of himself had just clicked into place. His wolf, a beast usually restless and on edge in foreign territory, suddenly let out a low, satisfied purr. It was a sound of pure contentment that Mason had never felt from him before, not even in his home. His wolf was at peace. But why? Mason blinked, forcing himself to move. He was a king, not a startled schoolboy. He walked toward her, the sound of his dress shoes echoing on the polished concrete floor. "Mr. Price," she said, her voice a calm, even tone that seemed to cut through the noise in his head. "Thank you for coming in." "Please call me Mason," he replied, his voice a low rumble. He extended a hand, and as her small, cool fingers brushed against his, the strange jolt returned, 1,000 times stronger. He felt his wolf give a more insistent nudge within him, a quiet hum of recognition. Mason's brow furrowed slightly. This was confusing. He was human. How could his wolf, the very essence of his being, react this way to a human? Chloe, completely unaware of his inner turmoil, simply cleared her throat and gestured toward her office. "Let's get started." Her office was even more minimalistic than the lobby. It was functional, clean, and cool. He took the chair she gestured to, a modern, uncomfortable-looking chair that was surprisingly sturdy. Chloe sat behind her desk, a pen poised over a notebook. She didn't smile. She was all business, a sleek professional with a guard up a mile high. "I've reviewed your file, Mason," she began. "Your beta, Marcus, has provided me with a substantial amount of data. Your age, your pack's history, your personal interests, your social circle. We can go over it if you like, but I believe I have a very clear picture of who you are and what you're looking for." Mason leaned back, a small, charming smirk playing on his lips. He was used to women fawning over him. His alpha status and his powerful presence usually made them blush and stammer. But not Chloe. She just met his gaze with a steady, unblinking stare. "I'm looking for my mate," he said, his voice laced with the easy confidence that had seen him through countless negotiations. "That's about it." Chloe's pen stopped. Her expression didn't change, but he saw a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. It was a small, almost imperceptible thing, but he was an alpha. He was trained to notice details. "That's not how this works, Mason," she replied, her voice still perfectly calm. "I'm not a magic 8-ball. I need details. Your preferences, your personality, The kind of woman who would compliment you as an alpha. The kind of woman who would make you happy, not just a biological match. A mate is more than just a genetic fit. They're a partner. They're your other half, not just a womb for your pups. The jab about the womb caught him off guard. He had never thought of it that way, had never wanted a Luna for just that purpose. It was a low blow, but he respected her for it. She wasn't afraid to challenge him. My wolf knows what it wants, he said, his voice dropping to a low, warning tone. Your wolf hasn't found her in 10 years, has it? She shot back, her gaze unwavering. Your wolf is looking for a feeling, an instinct. I'm looking for a person. We work together on this, or we don't work at all. Mason was stunned. No one, not his beta, not his elders, not his mother, had ever spoken to him with such bluntness. She was a human and she was laying down the law. It was infuriating. And yet, he found himself captivated. Her fearlessness was intoxicating. His wolf, far from being offended, was practically vibrating with pleasure. He let the smirk return. Fine, he said. What do you need? Everything, she replied. We start from the beginning. We'll go on a few dates. I'll send you on carefully vetted outings with carefully selected matches. And I need you to be honest with me. Brutally honest. About everything. He nodded slowly. Done. So, when do we start? As soon as I have a suitable match, she said, a small professional smile finally gracing her lips. I'll be in touch. Mason stood up, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He was relieved that the process had begun, but he was also profoundly intrigued by the woman in front of him. He reached for the doorknob, and as he was about to leave, he glanced back at her. Her eyes were fixed on his, a look of pure, unadulterated curiosity in their depths. The same strange pull zapped between them again, a quiet, insistent recognition. Mason walked out of the office and into the bustling city. The moment the door closed behind him, he felt his wolf give a frustrated howl. Not of anger but of loss. It was like a part of him had been left behind. He had found a feeling he had been searching for his whole life, not in a mate, but in a cynical human matchmaker. It made no sense. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. He had to trust the process. He had to trust her. He had a perfect record after all. And his soul was depending on it. Chapter 3. A week later, Chloe sat at her desk, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She had done it. After 3 days of poring over her database, cross-referencing personality profiles, and analyzing pheromone compatibility reports, she had found him his perfect match. Her name was Brianna, a stunning alpha in training from a reputable pack in the Pacific Northwest. On paper, Brianna was everything Mason needed. She was strong, with a razor-sharp intellect and a fierce loyalty to her pack. She was a natural-born leader, graceful under pressure, and had a pack rank that complemented his own. She was, in short, a perfect Luna. Chloe felt a familiar thrill of professional satisfaction. This was her favorite part of the job. The puzzle, the methodical process of taking two people and finding the logical solution that would bind them together. She typed out a short, concise email to Mason, outlining Brianna's profile and the details of their dinner reservation. She felt an unshakable confidence. There was no way this wouldn't work. Mason, however, had his doubts. He'd gone on countless dates like this before, dates that had all the right ingredients but none of the magic. But he had promised to trust her, and to his surprise he found himself looking forward to it. It wasn't the idea of meeting Brianna that excited him. It was the prospect of getting to talk to Chloe again. He found himself thinking about her strange, unsettling presence and the way his wolf had gone quiet in her office. It was a silent hum of contentment, a feeling he still couldn't logically explain. When he met Brianna at the restaurant, a low-key but elegant place Chloe had booked for them, he was impressed. Brianna was beautiful in a powerful, undeniable way. She had a cascade of long dark hair, eyes the color of warm honey, and a regal bearing that spoke of her lineage. The moment they sat down, Mason felt the familiar pull of a shared rank, a mutual respect for the challenges of leadership. But that was where the connection ended. The conversation started well enough. They spoke about pack politics, about the challenges of protecting their territories, and about the ever-present threat of rogue shifters. Mason, however, was a modern alpha. He liked talking about business, about the intricacies of his pack's legal and financial portfolio. He tried to steer the conversation in that direction. "Our pack is looking into investing in a new tech company," he said, trying to be a bit casual. "We're hoping it will create more jobs and stabilize the local human economy." Brianna looked at him with a blank expression. "Why would we need to do that when the forest provides everything? The only real business a wolf needs is tracking and hunting." She then launched into a long, detailed monologue about the best way to track a wild boar in the freezing snow. A monologue that left Mason's mind completely blank. He was a leader, yes, but his pack was a sprawling, multi-million-dollar business, not a remote hunting tribe. He tried to politely change the subject. "I was reading a fascinating article the other day about modern urban planning," he started, but Brianna cut him off with a bright, charming smile. "Have you ever had to face down a rogue beta? It's a very different challenge from a rogue alpha. You have to be careful not to trigger their fear response." She then went on to describe in excruciating detail a fight she had been in during a training exercise. Mason tried. He really did. He listened, he nodded, and he feigned interest. But his mind was somewhere else, replaying his conversations with Chloe. He remembered her dry, witty humor, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her business, and the fierce intelligence that radiated from her. Compared to that, this was just a business transaction. Brianna was a perfect match on paper, but a complete stranger in person. There was no resonance, no spark, no hint of a soul-deep connection. There was only the stale air of a polite dinner and the uncomfortable silence that fell when they finally ran out of things to talk about. The entire date felt like a job interview. A very, very long and incredibly awkward one. When the dinner finally ended, they parted with a polite, professional handshake. As he walked to his car, Mason felt a familiar disappointment, a gnawing emptiness that had returned with a vengeance. He had trusted the process and it had failed him just as every other attempt had. The next day, Mason found himself at Chloe's office, a day earlier than their scheduled debrief. He walked in without an appointment, much to the young receptionist's surprise. He didn't bother to wait. He just walked straight to Chloe's office door, his jaw set in a hard line. Chloe was on the phone, her voice a low murmur, but she immediately looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and annoyance. She quickly ended the call. "Mason, you're early," she said, her tone clipped. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "The date was a disaster," he said bluntly, not bothering to sit down. Chloe's posture stiffened. He picked up her pen, a defense mechanism. "That's a bit strong. Brianna is a fantastic woman. She's everything you said you wanted." "I never said I wanted her to give me a lecture on the art of tracking an animal," he shot back, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "I felt like I was back in a training seminar. There was no connection. No spark. Nothing." Chloe's brow furrowed. She scrolled through her tablet looking at his file. "But the numbers, the metrics were off the charts. You two are a perfect fit." "On paper, maybe," Mason said, the cynical tone in his voice surprising even himself. "But in person it was like talking to a statue. A very beautiful, very serious statue who only talks about how to find a wild deer. Look, I'm an alpha. I have to think about my pack's finances, their health care, their education. I need a Luna who gets that. Who understands the modern world." Chloe's composure began to crack. He could see it in the tightening of her lips, the slight tremble in her hand as she put down her pen. Her perfect record was at risk. He felt a weird, complicated pang of satisfaction at seeing her rattled. It was almost humanizing. "Fine," she said, a hint of steel in her voice. "Brianna was a test run. A control. I'll go in a different direction. I have another match in mind." She's a fashion designer from New York. She's outgoing, spontaneous, and lives completely in the human world. A different kind of Luna for a different kind of wolf. What do you think? Mason hesitated. He thought of the artist who only spoke in metaphors, and the librarian who tried to explain quantum physics on their dinner date in his memory. He suddenly realized Chloe was setting up more dates for him. And in his mind he realized he felt a strange sense of disappointment. He was hoping she would scrap the dates and just spend time with him. The realization hit him with the force of a punch. He was enjoying the process of getting to know her more than the actual goal of finding his mate. "I'll do it," he said, his voice flat. He was a man of his word. He had to trust her. He had no other options. As he turned to leave, Chloe called out his name. "Mason." He turned around. The look in her eyes was one he hadn't seen before. It was a mix of frustration and something else. A quiet, burning challenge. "I've never failed before," she said, her voice low and fierce. "And I'm not going to start now." Mason stared at her for a long moment, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He felt his wolf give a low, joyful rumble. He hadn't felt this alive in years. This wasn't a business transaction anymore. This was a battle of wills. And he, the man who had given up on love, was suddenly very, very interested in the outcome. He had no idea what her secret was, but he was determined to find out. This was a battle of wits he was excited to win, and to win it he had to keep playing the game. Chapter 4. Chloe spent the next 2 days in a state of professional panic. Her mind, usually a fortress of logic and data, was a battlefield of warring thoughts. She had to prove that Mason's first match was an anomaly, a fluke. She had to prove that her system was flawless. This time she would go in a completely different direction. She opened Mason's file and scrolled through the thousands of potential matches, bypassing the strong, traditional she-wolves and landing on a profile she would have never considered for him before. Tiffany, a fashion designer from New York City. Tiffany was a riot of color and energy in her profile photos. She wore clothes that looked like wearable art, and her bio was a stream of consciousness about design theory and the vibrational energy of urban spaces. She was everything Brianna was not. She lived completely in the human world, but her wolf was a vibrant, playful spirit. Chloe told herself this was the perfect antidote to the solemnity of his last date. This time it would work. It had to. Mason walked into the chic, minimalist coffee shop for his date with Tiffany, feeling a sense of impending doom. He had seen her picture. He was fully prepared for another disastrous date. He was just not prepared for the kind of disaster it would be. Tiffany was even more vibrant in person. She was a whirlwind of motion and sound, her every gesture big and dramatic. She greeted him with a hug that was surprisingly strong for a woman so small, and then immediately started talking. And she didn't stop. "Oh my gosh, I saw you from across the room and I was like, yes. The aura. Giving. I don't know, like ancient forest god meets a really hot lawyer. Is that a thing?" "I think it's a thing," she said, her hands flying as she spoke. Mason, a man who preferred quiet contemplation and concise conversation, was completely overwhelmed. He tried to get a word in, to ask a simple question, but Tiffany was an unstoppable force. The conversation, if it could be called that, revolved entirely around her. She talked about her clothing line, her recent trip to Paris, the emotional impact of the color fuchsia, and a very serious critique of a new art installation she had seen. And the artist, oh my God, he tried to tell me that his soul was a kaleidoscope of 1,000 forgotten stars. Can you even believe that? So, hey, derivative. Like, give me a break. I told him my soul was a well-managed portfolio, and he looked at me like I was a monster. Mason, who had spent the last 2 years painstakingly managing his PAC's financial portfolio, felt a flicker of something in his chest that was a mix of outrage and pure bewilderment. He wanted to scream. He wanted to go home. He wanted to talk to Chloe, to tell her about the disaster unfolding in front of him. Tiffany, completely oblivious to his inner torment, continued her monologue. I'm just so grateful to Chloe. He just gets me, you know? Like she knows I need a guy with a certain vibe. Someone who can appreciate the poetry of a well-placed zipper. Mason, a man who had never once thought about a zipper, just nodded. He sat through the entire date in a state of amused horror, eating his gluten-free scone in silence while Tiffany critiqued the lighting in the coffee shop and explained her theory on why beige was the most emotionally stunted of all colors. When the dinner finally ended, he felt a profound sense of relief. He politely shook her hand and then walked quickly in the opposite direction, a ghost of a smile on his face. The entire experience had been a total failure, but it was a failure of such magnificent proportions that he was actually looking forward to his call with Chloe. The next afternoon, the phone in Chloe's office rang. She took a deep breath before answering. She was a professional. She would handle this. Mason's voice was calm, but she could hear the undercurrent of something that was not disappointment but amusement. The date was something, he said. I heard, she replied, keeping her voice even. She has a lot of energy. She has a lot of energy, he agreed. She also tried to get me to buy her new line of designer backpacks for dogs. For my pack. Chloe's composure, which had been hanging on by a thread, snapped. A small giggle escaped her lips. Mason, hearing it, chuckled. What's so funny about my wolves wearing designer backpacks? He asked, his voice laced with mock offense. The giggle turned into a full-blown roar of laughter. Chloe put her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the force of it. She couldn't stop. The thought of the fierce, powerful, and ridiculously serious wolves of the price pack, all dressed in tiny designer backpacks, was the most absurd thing she had ever heard. Mason, hearing her laugh, joined in. His deep, rumbling laughter filled her office, a warm, rich sound that made her heart feel a little lighter. It was a genuine sound, not the polite chuckle he used with his clients, but a true, joyful laugh. It was infectious. When their laughter finally subsided, a comfortable silence fell between them. It was a different kind of silence than the one in her sterile office. This was a silence filled with a shared joke, a shared moment of relief. It was the first time she hadn't felt like a professional talking to a client. She felt like a friend talking to a man who was just as exhausted and exasperated as she was. I don't get it, she said, her voice still a little breathless from laughter. You're perfect. You're charming, you're handsome. What is it with these women? Mason shrugged as if he could do it over the phone. They're all great women. They're just not her. He said it with such a deep sadness that a wave of empathy washed over Chloe. She saw past the alpha, past the charming facade, and saw the man who was truly lonely. It was a different kind of ache than the one she had felt from her other clients. This was a soul-deep pain. It made her cynical heart ache in a way she didn't understand. She wanted to fix it. Not for her perfect record, but for him. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, she said, the raw honesty in her voice surprising even herself. I've never had a failed match before. You're not doing anything wrong, he said, his voice soft. My wolf is just picky, I guess. Picky, she scoffed. Your wolf just went on a date with a woman who talked about the emotional energy of the color beige for 2 hours. That's not picky, that's just insane. He laughed again, a low, warm sound. Well, maybe he just hasn't found the right scent yet. You know, the one that makes him go wild. I'm sure he will, she said, her voice laced with a newfound determination. She wasn't giving up. Not on him. And in that moment she realized she was not just doing this for her reputation. She was doing it for Mason. For the laugh lines around his eyes, for the quiet sadness she heard in his voice, for the impossible hope he still held on to. The cynical wall she had built around her heart had a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in it, and Mason was the one who had put it there. Chapter 5. The morning after their shared laughter over the phone, Mason found himself at his own desk, staring blankly at a pile of pack reports. The reports were important, detailing the security protocols for the upcoming season, but his mind was stubbornly, annoyingly on Chloe. He couldn't shake the image of her laughing, a genuine unforced sound that had made his wolf stir with a quiet contentment he still couldn't understand. He had spent his entire adult life around werewolves, had been exposed to the scent of countless potential mates, yet none of them had ever evoked the calming, centering response that Chloe did. He realized the bad dates were the only thing giving him an excuse to talk to her. The idea of ending the process of finding a match and never speaking to her again felt profoundly wrong. He needed to find a way to prolong their connection without raising her suspicions or, more importantly, his own. He reached for his phone and sent a short text. "Can we talk? Need a professional consultation." A few minutes later, her response came through. "My office. 2 p.m. Chloe felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Mason was coming back. Was he finally giving up? She found herself hoping he wasn't. The frustration of his failed dates had been oddly exhilarating, a challenge that had awakened something in her she didn't know existed. She was ready to try again. She had a list of a dozen more potential matches, each one more absurd than the last, just to see what would happen. When he arrived, she was all business, her expression a careful mask of professionalism. "Mason," she said, gesturing to the seat. "What can I help you with?" He took the seat, his stormy gray eyes fixed on hers. "The matches aren't working, Chloe. And I think I know why." Her heart sank. She knew it. He was done. "You're quitting?" she asked, a hint of genuine disappointment in her voice that she couldn't hide. He smiled, a slow, disarming curve of his lips. "No. I'm changing the strategy. You're working off a checklist of what you think I want. But you don't actually know me. Not the real me. I'm a king to my people, a monster to my enemies. But who am I when I'm just a man? Think we should hang out outside of this sterile office. You can see me in my natural habitat. Maybe it'll give you a better idea of what my wolf is looking for." Chloe's professional instincts screamed at her. This was a violation of every rule in her book. She had to stay detached. She had to keep a clear line between client and professional. And yet, the idea of spending time with him, of seeing the man behind the alpha, was too compelling to resist. She was a scientist after all. And this was a new kind of experiment. "Consider it market research," he said as if reading her mind. "No dates, no pressure. Just us." She took a deep breath. Her perfect record was already on the line. What did she have to lose? "Fine," she said, the word a reluctant agreement. "What did you have in mind?" Mason's smile widened into a full-blown grin. It was the first time she had seen him so genuinely happy, and a spark of something warm ignited in her chest. Their first outing was a trip to the local Home Depot. It was not at all what Chloe had expected. She had envisioned a coffee shop or a scenic walk in the park. Instead, she found herself in the fluorescent-lit aisles of a hardware store, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and paint. "My beta Marcus is terrible with tools," Mason said as he expertly navigated through the crowded store. "He has an office job. He can't even hammer a nail straight. So I end up doing most of the work on my own." Chloe watched him, fascinated. This was a side of Mason she had never seen. He was not the powerful, imposing alpha of legend. He was just a guy in a simple t-shirt and jeans, talking about plumbing fixtures and toolkits with an easy, comfortable ease. He had the quiet confidence of a man who knew how to use his hands. "I need a new drill," she said, pointing to a sleek, expensive-looking model. Mason took one look at it and shook his head. "No, no, no. That's a pretty drill. It's for people who want to look like they know what they're doing. This is what you want." He picked up a solid, no-nonsense-looking drill with a scuffed exterior. "This is a workhorse. It'll last you for years." He explained the different kinds of drill bits and the best way to hang a shelf, his voice patient and full of a knowledge that was a world away from pack politics and supernatural laws. Chloe, who had always paid someone to do her handiwork, found herself hanging on to his every word. "You're a handyman," she said, a small, genuine smile on her face. He chuckled, a low warm sound. And you're a city girl, he shot back, a playful glint in his eye. You wouldn't know a Phillips head screwdriver from a flat head. Chloe shot him a withering look. I'm an expert in my field. You're an alpha. You're not supposed to be an expert in hardware. It's ridiculous. Well, my wolf likes building things, he said with a mischievous grin. What about yours? Chloe froze. The question was a joke, a playful jab, but it hit a nerve. Her wolf was her cynical heart, her professional detachment. It didn't build things, analyze them, put them into neat, sterile boxes. But in that moment, standing next to him in the middle of a brightly lit aisle, surrounded by hammers and nails, she felt a strong, undeniable desire to build something with him. Mine likes spreadsheets, she said, the lie feeling heavy on her tongue. They chose the drill together, and as they stood in the checkout line, Mason's hand brushed against hers. It was an accidental touch, but a jolt of pure energy went through her. It wasn't the fiery electric jolt of a supernatural bond. It was a soft, warm feeling, a quiet spark of a connection that felt profoundly, beautifully human. She didn't pull her hand away. And neither did he. Mason felt a similar jolt, but his was accompanied by the sound of his wolf, a low, satisfied murmur that was growing more and more insistent with every second they spent together. He found himself thinking about her all the time. Her dry wit, her fierce intelligence, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. She was everything he had never known he was looking for. She wasn't a potential Luna, not in the traditional sense. He was a partner, an equal, a person who saw him not as an alpha, but as a man who was just as lost and confused as she was. He was an expert in leadership and she was an expert in love. He wondered if, together, they could finally solve the riddle of his heart. Chapter 6. Their market research outings continued over the next 2 weeks. It became a quiet, comfortable routine. Mason would send a simple text, available for consultation, and Chloe would reply with a time and place. They went for coffee at a small, independent shop where the barista knew his order by heart. They walked through a sun-drenched park, the sound of children's laughter a backdrop to their easy conversation. He showed her his favorite running trails on the outskirts of the city, and she pointed out the best places to get a good slice of pizza. With every outing, Chloe found her cynical shell cracking a little more. She saw the side of him that no one else did. The man who was genuinely kind to a waiter, who would pause a conversation to watch a dog chase a ball, who laughed a quiet, surprised laugh at a bad joke. He wasn't just the alpha, the king. He was a person. A person who was funny and kind and devastatingly, frustratingly handsome. One afternoon, Mason dropped by her office. It was a rare, rainy Tuesday, and the city outside her window was a gray blur. He was in casual jeans and a worn sweater, and the look of quiet contentment on his face was startling. He wasn't there for a meeting, he was just there. Thought I'd check in, he said, his hands shoved in his pockets. See how the market research is going. Chloe smiled, a genuine, unforced expression. It's going well. I have to say, my data on what makes an alpha happy is severely flawed. I'm going to have to do a complete rewrite. He laughed, a low, warm sound. Good. As long as you're learning something. Just then her phone buzzed with a reminder. Damn it, she muttered. She had completely forgotten. I have to get some files out of the storage room and I have a video call in 5 minutes. She gestured to a large, dusty box in the corner of her office, filled with ancient client files she hadn't looked at in years. The box was bigger than she had thought, heavy and awkward. She grabbed the sides, bracing herself, but the weight was too much. She wobbled, her arms straining, and felt a sharp pull in her back. Let me help you with that, Mason said, his voice dropping to a low, authoritative rumble. He moved toward her in a flash, his hand wrapping around hers on the side of the box. His touch was electric. Not a spark, not a jolt, but a slow, warm current that flowed from his palm to hers. It was a sensation that had nothing to do with her professional detachment and everything to do with the fact that he was so close she could feel the heat radiating off him. She felt him take the weight of the box, his arm muscles coiling with a strength she had only read about. She had always prided herself on being independent, on not needing anyone, and here he was, effortlessly doing something she had strained to do for a full minute. It was a humbling experience. "Where does it go?" he asked, his voice softer now. "The closet in the back," she stammered, still flustered by the warmth of his touch. He picked up the box with one arm as if it weighed nothing and carried it with him, his broad shoulders a wall between her and the rest of the world. She followed him into the small, dark storage room, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. He placed the box on the floor, and when he turned around they were face to face in the small space. The distance between them was less than an arm's length. "You okay?" he asked, his gaze searching her face. Chloe's heart was a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She was standing in a dusty closet with a powerful alpha, and the only thing she could think of was how close he was. His presence filled the small space, a warm, protective aura that made her feel safe in a way she had never felt before. "I'm fine," she said, her voice a little breathless. "Thank you. I can't lift heavy things. I've always been clumsy." Mason reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. His touch was so light she barely felt it, but it sent 1,000 shivers down her spine. "Nothing wrong with needing help sometimes," he said, his voice a low, intimate whisper. "You don't have to do everything by yourself, Chloe." His words, simple and kind, broke a wall within her that she didn't even know existed. For her entire adult life she had believed that needing someone was a weakness, that to be strong you had to stand alone. She had built a career on that belief, on the idea that love was just a transaction and that she was the one who could make it happen, but she didn't need it herself. But in this small, dark closet, with the weight of his kindness pressing down on her, she realized she was wrong. She looked at him not as a client, not as a puzzle, but as a man who saw her, truly saw her, flaws and all. And she felt a pull, a deep, magnetic pull that had nothing to do with genetics or biology, and everything to do with two souls recognizing a truth that had been hidden from them for too long. Mason felt it too. The pull was no longer a quiet purr, but a full-throated roar of a song he had been waiting to hear his whole life. It was a song of recognition, of coming home. His wolf was going crazy, a silent, joyous howl that echoed in his chest. His human mind was screaming at him. He was human. It was impossible. But his wolf knew the truth. He took a small step back, breaking the spell. The sudden distance between them was a physical ache. I should go," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "You have that call." He left before she could say another word. He was running. Running from the truth his wolf knew and his human mind couldn't accept. Chloe stood alone in the closet, the scent of him lingering in the air, a mix of pine and rain and something warm and uniquely his. Her hands, where he had touched her, still felt warm. The feeling was a strange kind of hope, a hope that was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The professional barrier was gone. It was gone, and she knew she was in a world of trouble. She was a matchmaker who had just fallen for her most difficult client. The irony was so profound it almost made her laugh. Chapter 7. The following evening, Mason met Chloe at a small, quiet restaurant. It was not the kind of place a powerful alpha would typically frequent. There was no grand architecture or an intimidating atmosphere. It was a cozy, dimly lit place with a fireplace, comfortable leather booths, and the low murmur of conversation that felt intimate and safe. He chose it for a reason. This was not a business meeting or a casual outing. It was a conversation, a quiet human moment he had been craving. Chloe arrived dressed in a simple but elegant dress, her dark hair a stark contrast to the soft glow of the candlelight. She sat across from him, and for the first time she didn't have her pen or her notebook. She had left her professional persona at the door. "This place is nice," she said, her voice soft. "It is," he replied. I come here when I want to get away from everything. The conversation began with light, easy banter. They talked about their weeks, the mundane details of their lives. Chloe talked about a particularly difficult human client who had refused to listen to her dating advice, and Mason told her a funny story about his beta, Marcus, trying to cook for the pack and nearly setting the kitchen on fire. They laughed easily, a comfortable shared sound that filled the small space between them. But beneath the surface of their laughter, a current of unspoken emotion was building. It had been there since the day he had helped her with the box, since the moment his hand had touched hers. It was a silent, powerful pull that was starting to feel undeniable. Mason looked at her across the flickering candlelight, and he saw not the sharp, professional matchmaker, but a woman with a deep well of sadness in her eyes. He wanted to understand it. "You've never told me why you started this business," he said, his voice low. "It's a strange profession for a human, especially one who seems so detached." Chloe's smile faded. She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously in her lap. She had never told anyone the real story. Not her family, not her few friends. Her business was a shield, a way to keep people at a distance, a way to prove to herself that she was in control. But something about Mason, about the quiet kindness in his gaze, made her want to tell him the truth. "I was in love once," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "With a werewolf. He told me I was his soulmate. The one. He gave me a scent-soaked handkerchief and my entire world changed. I became obsessed with his stories, his world. I believed him completely. I thought I had found my person." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "And then he left. Just disappeared. I never saw him again." Mason's face hardened, his jaw clenching. He felt a low, guttural growl rumble deep in his chest. His wolf, far from being a quiet, gentle presence, was now on high alert, a ferocious, protective force. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated anger at the man who had hurt her. "I was so devastated," Chloe continued, unaware of the turmoil she was causing. "I felt like I had been lied to. Like the entire concept of the fated mate bond was just a manipulative fairy tale. So I started reading. I studied the genetics, the biology, the pheromones. And I realized it's not magic. It's just a scientific reaction. A biological imperative. My business is a way for me to take control of a process that made me feel helpless. It's a way for me to prove that love isn't this big, scary, uncontrollable force. It's just a set of data points." She finally looked up, her eyes filled with a raw vulnerability he had never seen before. "I am a cynic about love, Mason. And I hid it because a matchmaker who doesn't believe in love isn't a very good one, is she?" Mason reached across the table, his hand gently but firmly taking hers. His skin was warm and comforting, and she instinctively squeezed his fingers. "He was a liar, Chloe," he said, his voice a low, fierce growl that was both a comfort and a threat. "That's not how it works. A true mate, a true wolf, would never do that to a human. He was a monster." The genuine anger in his voice, the raw protectiveness she felt from his touch, was more powerful than any of his earlier charm. He wasn't trying to make her feel better with empty platitudes. He was furious on her behalf. He was seeing her pain and he was validating it. He was seeing her as a human being who had been hurt, not a professional who had to be perfect. "I'm sorry he hurt you," he said again, his thumb tracing a slow, comforting circle on the back of her hand. "You deserved better." Chloe's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know why, but his simple words broke through her carefully constructed walls more effectively than any elaborate apology or grand gesture ever could have. He had seen the truth of her pain, and he was holding it gently and carefully in his hands. He was telling her that it was okay to be vulnerable, that she didn't have to be a cynic to be strong. In that moment she realized a terrifying and exhilarating truth. Mason was not a puzzle to be solved. He was not a client to be matched. He was not a concept to be analyzed. He was a person, a good and honest and kind person who was just as lonely as she was. He was the one who saw the person behind the cynic, the woman behind the matchmaker. He was the one who was telling her that her feelings mattered. And in that moment she realized with a sinking, heart-stopping certainty that she was falling in love with him. Mason felt the shift in her. He felt her hand tremble in his. He saw the tears in her eyes, and his wolf, once so angry, now filled with a deep, profound sense of devotion. He wanted to wrap his arms around her and tell her everything. He wanted to tell her that his wolf sang for her, that she was his home, his heart. He knew with a certainty that was both terrifying and absolute, that he had found her. He had found his mate. He just had to find the words to tell her. And she, the brilliant matchmaker who had been so certain about love being a biological imperative, was about to have a lesson in destiny. Chapter 8. The invitation arrived the next day, a formal engraved card that looked impossibly out of place on Chloe's sleek glass desk. It was an invitation to the annual Alpha Prize Gala, an event of legendary status in the werewolf community. Mason, the host, had scribbled a personal note on the back. Think of it as the ultimate in-person consultation. You can observe me in my element. You'll get a better sense of my pack. A wave of fear mixed with a thrill of exhilaration washed over Chloe. A part of her, the rational, professional part, screamed at her not to go. She was a human. An outsider. She had no business in a room filled with powerful werewolves in their home territory. The other part of her, the part that had been slowly and irrevocably falling in love with him, knew there was no way she could refuse. She had to see him in his world. She had to understand the man behind the alpha, and the only way to do that was to see him with his pack. She sent him a simple reply, "I'll be there." When the night of the gala arrived, Chloe felt like a spy going undercover in enemy territory. She was dressed in a stunning midnight blue gown she had bought just for the occasion. It was beautiful, but it felt like armor. She had no idea what to expect. She pulled up to the grand estate that was Mason's home, a sprawling modern mansion nestled in the heart of a lush forest. The grounds were lit with thousands of sparkling lights, and the air was filled with the low hum of conversation and the scent of werewolves mingling. The smell was something she could never have prepared for. It was a mix of musky earth, fresh pine, and the unique personal scent of each wolf, a scent so deeply ingrained in their being that it felt like an extension of their soul. It was a wild, intoxicating smell that filled her senses, and she suddenly felt very small and very human. She walked through the grand entrance and into a ballroom that was teeming with people. Werewolves of all ages filled the room, their laughter and conversation a loud, joyous symphony. Mason was at the center of it all. He was wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, and he looked more like a king than a man. He was laughing with a group of elders, his presence a powerful gravitational force that pulled everyone into his orbit. He was in his element, and for the first time, Chloe truly understood the weight of his responsibility, the scale of his power. When he saw her, his smile widened, a genuine, blindingly handsome grin that made her heart flutter. He immediately excused himself from the group he was speaking with and walked toward her. "You came," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I told you I would," she replied, her voice a little breathless. He reached for her hand and brought it to his lips, a gentlemanly gesture that sent a shock wave of warmth through her. "You look beautiful, Chloe," he said, his gaze fixed on her face. "Are you all right? This must be a lot." "It's a lot," she admitted, a small genuine smile on her face. "It's very different from my world." "Good," he said with a wink. "That's the point." He led her through the crowd, introducing her to his beta, Marcus, and his mate, Hannah, who looked at her with a mix of curiosity and kindness. "So you're the famous matchmaker," Hannah said, her eyes twinkling. "I heard you were a genius." "I just work with the data," Chloe replied, a little flustered. Mason introduced her to his mother, Clara, a warm, elegant woman with kind eyes who gave her a genuinely warm hug. "I've heard so much about you," Clara said, her voice soft. "My son is very fond of you." The words were a quiet, knowing nudge, a silent question that made Chloe's cheeks burn with a blush she couldn't hide. As the night went on, Chloe felt herself relax a little. She found a quiet spot near a balcony and watched the pack. She saw the way they moved, the way they communicated without words, the way they were so completely and utterly connected to each other. It was a beautiful thing to witness, and it made her feel a profound sense of loneliness. She was an outsider looking in on a world that she could never truly be a part of. She was a human among wolves, and the difference felt like a chasm she couldn't cross. Just then a woman approached her. She was tall and slender with a sharp, regal nose and a look of cold disdain in her eyes. It was Serena, one of Mason's previous matches, a beautiful alpha in training with a powerful pack lineage. She had been a perfect match on paper. "You're the human," Serena said, her voice a low sneer. "The one who thinks she can meddle in things she doesn't understand." Chloe's professional detachment immediately kicked in. She straightened her spine, her expression a cool, impassive mask. "I'm a consultant," she said, her voice even. "I help people find their person." "You're a fraud," Serena hissed, her wolf's scent turning sour with jealousy and rage. "The mate bond is sacred. You, a pathetic human, have no place here. Mason is just toying with you. He'll get tired of you and he'll go back to someone who understands his world. Someone like me." Chloe's heart began to pound in her chest. She wanted to run. But something inside her, a fierce, protective instinct that she didn't know she possessed, made her stand her ground. She was no longer a professional. She was a woman who was protecting the man she loved. Before she could reply, Mason was there. He appeared seemingly out of nowhere, his body a silent, imposing shield between her and Serena. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that sent a shiver of fear through Serena. "That's enough, Serena," he said, his eyes a cold, lethal gray. "You will leave her alone." Serena's eyes widened in fear. She bowed her head in submission, her body trembling. "Yes, Alpha," she whispered, and then she scurried away into the crowd. Mason turned back to Chloe, his eyes softened, but the fury was still simmering just beneath the surface. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hand gently but firmly gripping her arm. He just nodded, still shaken. "She hates me," she said. "She's jealous," he replied simply. "She's not your problem. I am." He held her gaze, a profound look of regret and something else she couldn't place in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Chloe. I should have warned you. This is what it's like. It's not just me. It's my pet. They need a Luna. Someone who can stand beside me." Chloe looked around the ballroom. She saw a sea of faces looking at them, their expressions a mix of curiosity and silent judgment. She was an outsider, a fragile human in a world of wolves, and she had no idea what to do. Just then a hush fell over the crowd. Mason's beta, Marcus, walked to the center of the room and called for a moment of quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "The Alpha has an announcement." Chloe's heart stopped. She looked up at Mason, her eyes wide with fear and a terrifying realization. An announcement. Here. Now. All of her carefully constructed walls, her cynicism, her data, her professionalism, they were all about to come crashing down. She was no longer just his matchmaker. She was his final match. And the entire pack was about to find out. She took a deep breath, and as Mason stepped away from her, his hand giving hers one final reassuring squeeze, she knew she had nowhere left to run. The moment of truth was here. Chapter 9. A hush fell over the crowd, a silence so profound Chloe could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. All eyes were on Mason, who had moved to the center of the ballroom floor. The air was charged with anticipation. This was it. The moment of truth. He was about to make his announcement. She braced herself, her hands clenching into tight fists at her sides. She felt like a fraud, an imposter who had wandered into the wrong story. She had come here to watch a professional triumph, to see her most difficult client find his happy ending. She had not come here to be the happy ending. Mason stood at the head of the ballroom, his gaze sweeping over his pack. He was the picture of an alpha in his element, powerful, confident, and utterly in control. He began to speak, his voice a low, commanding rumble that echoed through the room. "Hi Pack," he began, "I have an announcement. For years I have searched for the one. My Luna. I have traveled far and I have had many disappointments. My search has led me to a new path, a new way of finding my mate." He paused, and as he spoke his gaze, which had been sweeping the room, settled on Chloe. He hadn't been able to stop himself from looking at her all night. But now it was different. Now the sight of her, the smell of her, the very essence of her, was an overwhelming, soul-shaking force. He felt it in his chest, not as a whisper, but as a roaring song that was so loud it threatened to drown out all other sound. His wolf was going crazy. It wasn't just a purr of contentment anymore. It was a symphony of recognition, a primal howl of joy that echoed through his blood. He had never felt anything like it. It was the feeling of a missing puzzle piece sliding perfectly into place. It was 100 years of longing and 1,000 years of hope, all coming to a head in a single perfect moment. The pull was no longer a gentle tug. It was an unbreakable, unyielding bond. It was destiny. His speech faltered. His eyes, which had been so clear, were now clouded with a mix of shock and pure, unadulterated devotion. He couldn't speak. He couldn't think. All he could do was feel. He felt the pure, intoxicating scent of her. Not the scent of a werewolf, but the scent of a human who was inexplicably his mate. She smelled of cinnamon and rain and something warm and uniquely hers. He took a step forward and then another. The entire pack was watching him, confused. Why had he stopped? Why was he moving toward a human woman? The elder's eyes were wide with a mix of shock and silent disapproval. He didn't care. His wolf was in control, and it was pulling him with a force so powerful it was like a physical current. Chloe watched him move toward her, a silent, terrifying, magnetic force. He walked through the crowd as if it didn't exist, his eyes fixed on hers. The murmurs of the pack grew louder, a wave of confusion and shock rippling through the ballroom. The scent of their confusion filled the air, but all Mason smelled was her. He finally stopped in front of her, his hand reaching out to gently cup her cheek. His thumb traced a soft, tentative line along her jaw, and a 1,000-volt current, hot and powerful, shot through her. It was the same current she had felt in the closet, the same feeling she had felt in his office. But this time it was stronger. It was the undeniable truth, a physical manifestation of a bond she had spent her entire career denying. "Chloe," he said, his voice a low, breathless whisper. "It wasn't them. It was you." The words hung in the air, a shocking, beautiful, impossible truth. Her mind, the sharp, logical mind that had built an empire on data and cynicism, was trying to make sense of it, trying to find a flaw in his logic, a loophole in her system. He was a human. He was a werewolf. It was impossible. She was a matchmaker who had just fallen in love with her most difficult client. It was the most perfect irony she had ever encountered. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "My wolf went quiet in your office," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was a song of pure contentment. He wasn't looking for a mate. He had already found her. He just had to find the words to tell me. Chloe's heart, which had been a frantic drumbeat, now felt like a bird trapped in a cage, desperately trying to get out. Her entire worldview was shattered in a single beautiful moment. She had built her life on the idea that love was not a cosmic force, but a biological one. She had built a business on the idea that she could find other people's perfect matches. But her final match was the one she had never been able to place. It was the one who had been with her all along. The entire pack was silent, their eyes wide with shock. This was not the announcement they were expecting. They were expecting a mate, a Luna. They were not expecting a human. Mason, with his eyes closed, could feel their confusion, their silent questions, but he didn't care. All he felt was her. All he smelled was her. All he wanted was her. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. He opened his eyes and looked at her, and the love and devotion in their depths was so powerful it took her breath away. He was an alpha. He was a king. And he was hers. And she, the cynical matchmaker who had never believed in love, was finally, irrevocably in love with him. She had spent her life proving that love wasn't a fairy tale. And in that single perfect moment she realized that it was. And she had found her forever. The rest of the world could wait. The only thing that mattered was them. Epilogue. 6 months later, Chloe sat at her new desk, a sleek, minimalist piece of furniture that was now located in a beautiful sun-drenched office in the west wing of Mason's sprawling estate. The view from her window was no longer the gray concrete of a city, but a lush, endless expanse of emerald green forest. The air, rich with the scents of pine and damp earth, was a constant, comforting presence. She had moved in 2 months ago, and with every passing day she felt less like a visitor and more like a true resident. She wasn't a wolf, and she never would be, but she was a part of the pack. She was their Luna. It was a title she still wasn't entirely comfortable with, but she was learning to wear it with the same quiet confidence she had once worn her professional armor. The pack, after the initial shock and confusion of the gala, had welcomed her with a cautious but genuine warmth. Mason's mother, Clara, had been her fiercest champion, a gentle guide in a world of unspoken rules and ancient traditions. The pack members who had once looked at her with suspicion, now looked at her with respect, a quiet, knowing understanding in their eyes. She had proven to them that she was not just a passing fling, she was the real thing. She was their alpha's mate. Her business, Faded Finds, was still thriving, but with a new, unexpected focus. She no longer just dealt with first meetings. She now specialized in long-term relationship counseling for paranormal couples, applying her data-driven mind to the emotional challenges of a life bound by destiny. Her cynical approach to love had been replaced by a newfound, gentle empathy. She understood, in a way she never had before, that love wasn't just a transaction. It was a journey. And her own journey had been the most terrifying and rewarding of all. She was in the middle of a video call with a client, a young she-wolf who was having trouble communicating with her mate about their differing life goals. Chloe was listening patiently, her eyes fixed on the screen, a new kind of understanding in her heart. She was a different person now. She was happy. Just then Mason walked in, a tray of coffee and 2 mugs in his hands. He was wearing a worn t-shirt and a pair of old jeans, his hair a little disheveled. He looked more like a man and less like a king, and it was a sight that made her heart flutter every single time. He set the tray down on her desk, his eyes fixed on hers. He didn't say a word, but the silent question in his gaze was clear. "Are you happy?" She replied with a small, private smile that said, "More than I ever thought possible." She finished her call, and Mason sat in the chair opposite her, the same chair he had sat in all those months ago when their journey began. The irony wasn't lost on her. He took a sip of his coffee and looked at her, his eyes warm. "So, what's our first official act as a couple?" she asked, a playful grin on her face. He chuckled, a low, warm sound. "You're asking me? I thought you were the expert." "I am," she said, her smile broadening. "And according to my data, the best way to ensure pack happiness is for the Alpha and Luna to have a quiet dinner and a night of uninterrupted sleep." His laughter filled the room, a rich, joyous sound that made her feel a profound sense of peace. His wolf, which had once been a restless, aching presence in his soul, was now a quiet, contented hum, a constant, reassuring presence that felt like coming home. She had found her person, and she had found her place in the world. He reached across the desk and took her hand in his. His touch was no longer a shocking jolt of electricity, but a warm, familiar comfort. He laced his fingers through hers, his thumb tracing a slow, steady circle on the back of her hand. "I'm glad you agreed to be my final match," he said, his voice a low, intimate whisper. Me too, she replied, her eyes filled with a love she had once believed was a myth. My perfect record is still intact. It's just a little more personal now. She looked at him, the man who had torn down her cynical walls with his kindness and his loneliness, and she understood. Love wasn't a scientific formula. It was a tangible, undeniable force. It was the moment you realized that your most difficult client was the one you were meant to find all along. It was the beautiful, impossible truth that had made a cynic believe in happy endings. Her perfect record was still intact. It was just a little more personal now. And in the quiet hum of his wolf and the soft beat of her own human heart, she knew she had found her forever. And that is the story of a woman who found love in the one place she never thought to look, right in front of her. Do you believe some loves are fated, or are they a choice? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you want more stories that defy all logic, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss my next stories.